Alright, so let me just show you what we're going to be doing today. So first of all, I just want to point out that I've deleted the axes in the ground direction and the fall direction, and that's because I've moved them to be shown as lines, which you can see when we move our player around. There's a little bit of a delay, but that's not much of an issue. The second thing is, whenever we were colliding, we were setting in a vector 3 that was the kind of like the last known collision of the player, and as a result, whenever we moved to a point where we weren't colliding with anything, it sort of stayed at that point in the world. So I updated it, fixed that problem, and now, as you can see by the red line, which is representative of the ray that we're casting, it follows the player. Now, I know it looks kind of like it doesn't follow the player one-to-one, and I think that's just due to the way the lines are drawn, but that's not a problem. It shouldn't affect anything other than the visual representation of those rays or normals. And then the last thing is, I updated the controls, so as you can see, all of our controls are here again, and they have little arrows next to them. That's because we can open them up to reveal that we have now a primary and a secondary control for them. And those primary and secondary controls support multiple key bindings. So I'm going to be limiting this to 2 because I honestly don't, there's no reason why we should have a control, a shift, and then a key press. Although we could probably set that up. But yeah, I mean, if you needed a shift key press and then a control key press, where you're using 2 different keys, that's basically what this would support. And then for instance, we've got the primary and secondary keys where W and up arrow both move the player forward. By the way, stay tuned to the end if you're interested in joining me in some streams. And yeah, let's get started. Alright, so to start, I'm going to focus in on our player real quick. I'm going to check ground normal. I'm going to make sure that in our game we have gizmos to on. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get rid of the axes under ground direction and fall direction. Let's open up player controller. Okay. So over here, down at the bottom where we have debug, we got to change the name of this because it won't work otherwise. So I'm going to call this debug ground normals. Drop that up there so that we're calling the method. And then inside here, I'm gonna put if statement show ground normals. Then what we want to do is we want to use debug, which is what we would have been basically making. It basically would have made it so that we wouldn't have been able to use this if we hadn't changed this name from debug to debug ground normals. So debug.draw line. And we want to draw the line from transform.position. Let's actually create a vector 3. So we're going to call this vector 3 line start. And set it to transform position plus vector 3 dot up times 0.5. No, let's 0.05, not because that's like half a meter up. That's ridiculous. Okay, so line start is going to be the first one, and then the second one is going to be line start plus ground direction dot forward times 0.5f, just to make it so that it's not too ridiculously long. Alright, so then I'm going to copy this one, paste it again right below, change the boolean here to show fall normal, and change this one to fall direction dot up. Alright, so there's actually one other thing that we can do. We can set colors. So right in the end here, I'm just going to set the color of the ground normal to color.blue because it's representative of the z-axis, which is usually blue. And then in show fall normal, we're going to use the y-axis color, which is color.green. Yeah. So now essentially what we have is we just have it showing us exactly what's going on if we walk around, if we slide down the hill. You know what I mean? And that's great. Okay. So the next thing we're going to solve is the problem with this. So right now, I'm actually going to use, I'm just going to copy this right now. And we'll bring it up to, we'll put it right above the ground ray origin. Or no, let's put it directly below. So we'll add ground ray dot origin, plug the same in thing here, and set, I guess it's going to be vector3 dot down times 0.5f, or maybe 5.5. Yeah, and it's going to be color red instead. So I want you to pay attention to what happens, so you can see our ground origin. If I were to pause this right now while we're jumping, and we come over here and look at what's going on, our collision point is basically set to where we collided most recently, and it's not following our player anymore, which is why we're having issues falling off the ledge here, where essentially, because it stays colliding with the ground as we're falling down, we fall down along the normal of this plane, which is not something that we want. We want to fall downwards and then hit the plane and then slide down it. So in order to solve that, we need to come down to where we're setting collision point, and below we're just going to go collision point is equal to and we're basically just going to set a direction kind of and a distance. So the way you want to do that normally is you want to do where you're going to, so collision point minus where you're coming from, so transform dot position. And essentially it's just going to create like not a normal, but like you can normalize it if you want to. So let's say you actually did want to normalize this into a direction. You could just come down here and go collision point is equal to collision point dot normalized. But well, I don't want to do that because I want to maintain the distance of this. And essentially what that means is we can come here and go transform dot position plus collision point, and that'll basically put us in the right spot. It should follow along. So now, as you can see, it's just sticking down at the bottom, and if we just kind of slide sideways off this, you can see where it's colliding. It's a little jagged, so we might have to go in and smooth that out, but regardless, there it is. Anyways, we can also shorten that, but yeah, we can also shorten that. I think it might be worthwhile to shorten that. So I think we'll just shorten down to like 3. And then let's come up here where we have our debug bools, and we'll just go show ground ray. We'll go if show ground ray, then we'll do that. maybe even pop this before all the other ones. Okay, I'm just gonna uncheck all of these. And so one of the other things, and this is more sort of just important for the control scheme. Like, it's great that we set this up. This would work completely fine. However, if we look at the way World of Warcraft actually handles controls, you usually have the ability to combine keys to create an individual control. So for instance, like if you do like a shift controller and alt, you can press any other key and then you'll essentially get, like, let's say like a shift 1 or a control 1, and you can map your action bar to those kinds of keys. In addition to that, there's also situations where you have multiple keys that do the same thing. So for instance, the WASD and the arrow keys all do the same thing. So in order to deal with that, I'm going to create a new C#. I'm going to call this a control binding. And inside here, I'm just going to get rid of everything. Get rid of mono behavior. And go system.serializable. So inside here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a public key code array. The first one's going to be called primary. And I'm going to set that equal to key code array of 1. And then the second one's just going to be called secondary. New key code array. Always remember that, new. Then we need to be able to access these arrays. And the thing is, like, you're going to have situations where you're just going to have the 1, right? So you're going to be able to press 1 key and that's it, and it's not going to be much of an issue. But if you have 2, you need to be able to detect both key presses. And so we need to create a Boolean, a public Boolean method. We're going to call this get control binding. And just to start, we're going to return false to get rid of the red squiggly. And then we'll start with primary, and then we'll go secondary, and then we'll check Keybindings. Let's create 2 bools here. We'll go primary pressed, and we'll set that equal to false, and secondary press, and we'll set that equal to false also. Right now, if primary.length is equal to 0, then it's very simple. We'll go if inputs dot get key, and we'll use primary. Primary. Oh, then we're going to set primary pressed equal to true. Else, if primary, it should be equal to 1, by the way, because if it's equal to 0, there's nothing in it. I usually get that confused because essentially the first index is 0, but essentially there's still one thing in there. But anyways, primary.length is equal to 2. Then we want to check to see if input.get key primary O, and then I'm going to copy this, and primary 1. And if both of those are pressed, then primary pressed is equal to true. Then I'm just going to copy all this down to secondary. I'm going to change everything to secondary. And then change secondary pressed. Oops. Alright, now what we need to do is we need to check to see if either of those have been pressed, right? So if primary pressed or secondary pressed, because we want to be able to do this in either case, then return true. And that's it. Alright, so now that this is done, we need to go into our controls and change all of these to control bindings. So all of these are control bindings now, and they should show this, and we should be able to use this to check to see if you're pressing the keys. If we look at all of our player controls, we can see that they're all giving us errors, so we need to change these to controls dot the key, so in this case controls dot forward dot get control binding. And I'm just gonna very quickly fast forward through me changing all of these. Only thing you really need to remember is that when we have these nothing cases where there are statements where if these buttons are not being pressed, then nothing happens, or our inputs are 0. Just make sure that you leave the exclamation points there because you don't want to have to deal with that issue. Alright, so just so you know, I'm skipping the toggle run because we need to set something up. For all of these other ones, it was input.getKey, which just returned a boolean that was true while you were pressing the key. However, input.getKeyDown will only return a bool. It will only return true the moment you press it, and I need to set that up in control binding. So let's do that. So I'm going to create a new public bool method called get control binding down. Above it, I'm going to create a new bool, and I'm going to call it unpressed. And essentially, we'll just again return false. Alright, so now we can copy all of this just to make our lives a little bit easier. And I'll probably just get rid of this check key bindings here because we need to do something else. But essentially, what we want to do is we want to go if unpressed, then we got to check to see if those are pressed. So if primary pressed or secondary pressed, then we want to set unpressed equal to false, or no, unpressed equal to true, and then return true. And then else, if not primary pressed and not secondary pressed, then we want to do unpressed is equal to false. I think that should be fine. Yeah, that should be good. So essentially what's happening is if let's change this to not unpressed, because unpressed is going to be equal to false by default. So if we haven't pressed anything and then we press something, we want to set unpressed to true, and then we want to return true. And then if unpressed is true and we're not pressing anything, then we want to set unpressed equal to false. Dot get control binding down, and I'm just going to reveal run just so we can see if it's working. But first we got to change all of the key, we got to set up all the key bindings. So I'm just gonna quickly fast forward through all of this and just leave a table I quickly created in OpenOffice of all the controls. As time goes on, I'm going to be adding to this table, and I'm probably gonna put it on a file sharing site just so everyone can see it if they need to. Alright, so now that we've set up all of our key bindings, let's double check everything. So walking, turning, walking backwards, strafing, great. So that's just WASD and Q and E. Those are all working. So now the arrow keys are working. Alright, that's great. Jumping, perfect. And let's toggle run. Okay, run is being toggled, which is excellent. That's exactly what we want it to do. Alright. So I'm just going to get rid of all of these serialize fields. And that should be it for our controls. Alright, so that was kind of like a pretty weird episode, I must admit. I think we covered a lot of interesting topics as well as addressed some of the errors in previous episodes. I think probably the one thing that I'm proudest of is the controls, because I'm really liking where they're going, and I can't wait to show you what I want to do with them. So yeah, on the topic of streaming, I have a Twitch channel that I usually stream virtual reality games on, and I honestly kind of just want to keep it as like a fun sort of like me streaming whatever the hell I want channel. But in addition to that, I think it'd be cool to sort of maybe host a night where I'll play a game, and anyone in the stream can just sort of come along and talk about like the different things that the developers did in the game, maybe things that we are inspired by, maybe things that we don't like so much. I know it's kind of like one of those things where like, oh, here's a bunch of randos thinking they know how to make a game better, but like I think even just thinking about these things could sort of exercise our abilities to like look at games and analyze them. So, you know, if you're like an indie dev or game developer of any aptitude, beginner or experienced, I think this might be a fun little way of like getting together and just talking about games. Anyways, let me know what you think, and I probably won't be hosting any one of those for a while until I kind of gauge the reaction to this and see if it's actually something I want to do. But I am going to be streaming, so if you kind of just want to pop in and say hi and hang out, I'll be leaving my Twitch down below, and you guys can just come in and chill. Next episode will be starting the camera. I'm pretty excited about that, so take it easy.
Super trooper, super trooper, super trooper, and he sells soup.